good morning and welcome back to the Business Breakfast Show with myself, David Bell, and always at my side, Mr. Nick Luby. An exciting show this morning, all lined up for you, all about business storytelling. So if you're a business owner and you want to tell a story or two and you need to put the cherry on the cake and make sure your story is credible, make sure it's enjoyable, then you've joined the right show this morning, because we have a fantastic guest joining us in the studio very shortly to talk us through not only his new book, which we'll talk about more very, very soon, but why storytelling is such an important feature in our presentations, in our keynote talks, maybe when we're pitching our business idea to potential investors, stakeholders, maybe your next opportunity to sell to a big or small client. So it's going to be an exciting show this morning. Nick, how are we this morning live in the Chelmsford studio?
Very good, mate. Thank you very much. Happy 9th of February to you. Already this month is flying by. Really excited about the show this morning because just like you, mate, I'm a massive fan of storytelling. And I find it a strange subject when we link storytelling and then have to remind businesses, oh yeah, you need to tell stories. You need to share your information in the form of a story. Right? It's what us humans do really, really well. We've evolved to be brilliant at it, and we've always been doing it. And you go down the pub, you go to a coffee shop, you go anywhere else, and it's natural that you're simply just telling stories. Right? You're sharing anecdotes, information. This is what's going on in the form of a story. And then you get to work and you put this formal cloak on, and you feel as though you can't tell stories. It's all facts and figures and spreadsheets and the sorts of stuff that us humans, we don't really warm to. I don't know, you may love a spreadsheet, but it's not as good as a story. Actually, lovely audience, right? The show, as always, is for you. I'll be really interested to know where you are with regards to storytelling, in or outside of business. And if you think a spreadsheet tells a better story than, let's say, us human storytellers. Where are you on the spreadsheet debate?
I love a spreadsheet. They have their uses, but are they friendly? Do they tell a story? Of course they don't. Someone who's pretty an expert at creating spreadsheets what do you say? I could put zeros and ones into a spreadsheet and make it tell a story. I'm sure you probably can. But look, for me, a story comes from the heart. Obviously, here, but it comes from the heart. It has meaning to it. It sets the atmosphere. You know, as speakers, Nick, from stage, we love including a story or two in our talks, our presentations. No doubt we've told many stories on all the shows that we've broadcast here live over the last, nearly 2 years now. And I feel that storytelling is a really important part, even from when we're like very young, 5 or 6 years old, maybe younger. My daughter's 6 now. She loves a story every night, in bed, a story. Now she's doing the reading, we're doing the listening, but that's, the storytelling is still happening. And we go through life, and stories are what connect us. So that's why I'm super excited to have someone on here this morning that's going to talk more to us about business storytelling, but it's going to be applicable across everything we do in everyday life. But before we kind of go down that rabbit hole all about storytelling, let's talk about something else really exciting. A previous big friend of the show, a guest multiple times, someone that's helped us promote our show in the past through FOMO, the fear of missing out, is back. Making Tea is joining us as part of our team, Nick. We've been having debates over the last week or so, and we've reached I'm not going to say an agreement because that sounds very formal, but we've come to the conclusion that May King would be a great addition to our, you and I team. So we go from 2, we become 3.
2 become 3. Come on, Spice Girls, get back together and sing that for us. Or is it 2 become 1? Anyway, yeah, May King joining the team. She's the queen of all things social media. Chances are, if you're on Twitter, you've come across May King Sang, or May King Tea is her Twitter handle. And a real interesting question, right? So you and I chat show, we'll broadcast, we'll have conversations, long form, half-hour plus conversations. What happens when we try and translate that to social media, which is short form communication, short form storytelling. When we get our lovely guest onto the show, one of the questions I'm keen to ask is, how do you, if you're a business, tell your story in, let's say, a short form Twitter style environment? Because I even if I'm on Twitter, I still want to tell a story. It's just a lot fewer words. I know that there's famous examples of telling stories in 6 words. So there's no reason we can't do the same on Twitter. But very excited for making to join us and to share what we're doing further, broader, and I guess to a different audience, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are a Twitter fan and you've stuck with it through the developments and changes that have been happening over the last few months, you'll see our presence on Twitter will be on the up starting next week officially, but Making's on the show with us next week and will be our co-presenter when Nick and I, because we've got a busy year coming up, lots of things happening. When Nick and I are not able to be broadcasting in the studio, Making will be jumping in the hot seat and taking over and being the third person helping us and supporting us. And then behind the scenes, popping into the show every week, saying a hello, giving us an update on what's happening out there in the big world and what's happening in the Twitter world. So yeah, lots of storytelling is going to come from that as well.
Brilliant. Our number one fan struggling to find us on Facebook this morning. Did you share it on your Facebook? Or is it on the
It is sharing. It's on the chat box. It is streaming out to our channels on Facebook. So it is, well, it appears to be. I'm watching it on the other screen here. It is there. But if you are struggling,
how do we look? We look all right.
You're looking good. Yeah, you're smiling, and yeah, that's why people say to me, David, sometimes you drift off, have other screens here, and the other broadcasts are all happening. So I just make sure everything's flowing. Don't forget, by the way, if you are watching this on Facebook, if you're lucky enough to be picking up that stream, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube, join the conversation. You can pop your comments into the chat box, and we will see them pop up here live in the studio. And as long as they're, which I know they will be, good quality, worthy comments, and they're all kind and polite, even if they're not, we might share them anyway. So do reach out to us. And you can always email us as well at hello@chatboxproductions.com. If there's anything else, we're keeping an eye on that email box of anything coming in through the old-fashioned way as well.
Quick news update, mate. AI news. So we started an AI discussion, and quite rightly so, because from a life or business point of view, it's going to make a difference. Some positive, some negative, more than likely. What's in the news at the moment around the AI world? There's some headlines.
Well, if anyone watches the news, if anyone's following the AI kind of war, ChatGPT is the one that's definitely leading the way. Microsoft supposedly invested over 10 billion into ChatGPT, and they're bringing the ChatGPT search engine, or the engine, into the Bing search. In fact, I've put my name on the waiting list because I want to test it and see how good it's going to be. But Google, one of those big organizations globally, certainly sitting up there in the top 3 or 4 companies in the world, have said, well, hang on. We've got Bard, and we're going to launch Bard, which is our AI equivalent of ChatGPT. And they did a live demo. Now, never work with children, never work with animals, and never do live demos, because these 3 things always have a problem. And it didn't go too well for them. It couldn't give an accurate answer to what is perceived a simple question. And it wiped 120 billion off their shares. Just like that. Because it was perceived that their AI wasn't as good. Now, I'm sure this is just, a small little problem that needs picking up and resolving. Someone maybe pressed the wrong button, said the wrong thing, didn't type it in the right order. But that is how detrimental this can be. One little thing can make such a big difference. 120 billion.
And I also understand there was investors weren't that impressed by their presentation as a whole.
Didn't tell a story.
But clearly didn't tell the story about their product very, very well. Now, you don't have to live for too long before you see presentations that are underwhelming. And most of the presentations that I've been to that you think instantly forgettable, one of the issues is the presenter never shared any stories. Right? Never did something to really engage or resonate with the humans in the audience. Storytelling is such a useful and easy peasy option if you know how to do it. And you know what we do? Our guest certainly does. So lots and lots of questions. However, lovely audience, if you've got a question for, let's say, a guest who knows more about storytelling than anyone else, then please ask away.
Yeah. And Nick, before we bring our guest onto the show, sitting patiently listening to us, probably going to pick us up and comment on some of the things that we've mentioned. We talk about ChatGPT, and I wanted to set a challenge here because I want to show how powerful this piece of software is. Now, for those that are listening on the audio only version, we'll try and give you a little bit of a kind of talk through here. But I'm just going to share my screen here, and I'm going to bring up the ChatGPT search engine window. And I'm going to ask it to write a story, Nick, about you and I presenting a business breakfast show. Okay, we're going to do this live. And I just said a minute ago, never do live demos because they never go right. But let's hope, fingers crossed, for this demonstration it works. So let me just share the screen. Here it is. So it's there it is on the screen. Okay, and I've already put into the box here, if you can read, it's quite small. Write me a story about a business show starring David Bell and Nick Luby from Chatbox Productions. So that's the question I've asked it. Now I'm going to hit the enter button. Here it goes. Okay, and it's thinking about this. Here we go. Look, it's writing a story.
So it's like it's typing along. If there was sound effects, you'd get the typing.
Yeah,
so if you can't see this, and it is very small on the screen, even if you can see it, it's just rattling away. So this is ChatGPT live, just creating the story. In fact, this is a problem, right? This is a problem for us humans, because if it's any good, right? If it's any good, people will opt for this rather than ask us lovely humans for stories. I've written a couple of books. Our guest certainly has written lots of books. I wonder what this does to the world of non-fiction as well as fiction. I wonder.
So it's still writing our story. It's still writing our story. We're up to paragraph 8. Okay, it's still going. I'm going to just let it go. I'm not going to read this out, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a copy of this and I will pop it into the chat for everybody to have a read, because I'm just reading down. Bear in mind, I just said David Bell, Nick Luby, Chatbox Productions, write a story about our breakfast show. It's gone off. It's found information about you and I, the breakfast show, and what we do. And it reads really, really well. So
what if it's awful? What if its story's awful? These two middle-aged blokes, they don't know what they're doing, but they had a go.
Well, actually, it's very complimentary about us. It's very complimentary. But you can hit the regeneration button if you don't like the story it's written. Hit it again; it will write a different version for you.
Oh, let's get our guest on, mate, and put some sense into all of this. This is the world's starting to unravel. I don't know if it's going to get easier or more difficult. Deary me. One thing I do know for absolute certain, we should tell more stories because we love them. And our guest will no doubt tell us exactly why we should do that.
Yeah. So let's welcome our guest this morning. Going to be talking to us about business storytelling. Please welcome into the studio, been sitting waiting patiently, Jyoti Guptara. Good morning and welcome.
Mate, before we start, I love when you introduce guests because it's so rare for you to get the name correctly.
How close was I?
Really bad.
Jyoti,
really,
I think, is the really true bad. Pronunciation, isn't it?
Jyoti Guptara, right?
Not bad, Nick. Not bad. Getting closer. Good morning, David and Nick. Good to see you, and hello, listeners around the world from Switzerland.
Yeah, live in Switzerland. So correct us. How close are we on the pronunciation? Obviously, I'm a million miles away. Nick's closer. So yeah, tell us who you are in the correct pronunciation, so everyone really knows who you are.
I'll give you some help. So remember, Joe is an easy name, right? Who's that guy who tells stories? Oh, that's the storytelling Joe. And my mum's English, you guys are British, so that's Joe. Now, what do English people do they tend to drink tea. So Joe tea, very easy. And where does the tea come from? The best tea in the world is from India, which is where my father is from. Jyoti, the British Indian bloke who tells stories. That's me.
There you go.
It's great.
We are now. We've got it. We're sold. Perfect.
The story's begun. The story's begun. So please, for our lovely audience, Jyoti, can you introduce yourself in with regards to what is it you do?
Yeah, my name is Jyoti Guptara, and I am the author of Business Storytelling from Hype to Hack, because that is what I do. I help people to tell stories to accomplish their objectives, whether that's a school teacher who wants to motivate her class, or whether it's a CEO of a large organization who has to excite people around a strategy or get them to understand what the strategy is in the first place. So I'm a writer, I'm a speaker, and I get to try and solve all sorts of very interesting communications and leadership challenges, whether that is with virtual reality or whether that is a leadership conference. And I help cross-functional teams to work together because, you know, these days when people are becoming more and more specialized, it's getting harder and harder for us to understand each other. And so that's a challenge that I help people with.
Yeah, excellent. We've got lots of questions to ask, but let's talk a little bit about your journey, where it all began, where it all started. I've got a copy of your book here, but this is not your only book. You've written a few others, but unlike some people like me, I'm only just working with Nick to put a book together, middle-aged. You know, I'm halfway through life and only just working on it. You started quite young. Tell us a little bit about when you started writing your first book and compiling the first words.
My twin brother and I were born on the 22nd of the 11th, 1988, 221188, pretty nice birthday for twins. So we always thought perhaps too highly of ourselves. You know, we're here to write history. And we realized as young children, it wasn't so easy to write history, but we could write books, or we could try. And so we started to emulate the writers that we appreciated, Tolkien and Lewis, and later on J.K. Rowling. And so we started to write down adventures that we would enact like most kids do. And at the age of 11, we decided to start writing a story and actually finish writing it instead of, you know, the 3-page versions of stories that never seemed to go beyond chapter 2. So we were quite ambitious at a young age, and were very disappointed when we never heard back from that first publisher that we submitted our debut to at the age of 11. And it was a long and painful journey until at the age of 17, we finally got a publisher that was in India. So this Indian publisher published our debut fantasy novel, and it became a bestseller in India. It actually climbed to number 2 on the national fiction bestseller list. So we sold the rights into German and Italian and Dutch. And by the age of 21, I'd published 3 books. And I thought, now I'm only just getting started. Next is the US, the biggest market in the world. But that didn't happen quite as quickly as I'd hoped. And along the way, I discovered through giving talks for businesses and organizations that I really enjoyed doing it, and that I had other skills to contribute in that arena, which was very exciting too. And that's how I got into the field of business storytelling. So I've published 6 books so far. I'm busy working on my 7th, 8th, and 9th book all at the same time, and trying not to go insane.
That sounds like quite a challenge, Jyoti. What strikes me is you started in let's say fantasy. So it's fiction. You start in fiction and then you work towards non-fiction. I want to ask, how difficult is that transition to make, and what did you learn in the world of fantasy storytelling as a youngster that really lends itself to storytelling in business? Because a lot of business owners I know, they're worried about telling stories. My job, it's too serious, you know, for us to tell stories. I know we're not suggesting you make stuff up. However, that transition from fiction to non-fiction must be quite tricky. And what did you learn for business owners?
So in 2015, I was a novelist in residence and a fellow at a United Nations partner organization, the GCSP. And I was there for 6 months to observe and be inspired and write stories, and also contribute to the life of the center, roundtable discussions and things like that, and give occasional talks. And in this one particular course, which was called Story as Influence, which I hosted within the larger creative diplomacy course, I realized that these ambassadors and executives were obviously brilliant people, but sometimes I found them more interesting over coffee or lunch, because that's when they would tell stories, which typically they had neglected to do during their official presentation. So one thing that I observed was that just by slipping in an anecdote, you can really liven up and interest people. It can be a hook, right? So I started seeing all these narrative devices that I'd learned writing novels, such as the hook, or a sense of momentum and progress. Even the act of turning pages in a book encourages you to keep going because you're making progress. And that is something incredibly important in our lives, whether personal or professional. And there are many other structures that I observed for books or short stories, however short or long they are, which you could apply almost one-to-one, though of course you do know how to talk about it. So I had to learn a different vocabulary, and how do you even convince or persuade these business people that I'm right? And I had to learn to do that with stories myself. And one thing really helped me, Nick and David, which was I'd been giving readings as an author in schools, and I'd started teaching workshops. Now, if you can interest a rebellious teenager who really isn't interested in reading to write a story and to spend half a day reading structures and things like that, then you've learned a thing or two about persuading and helping a busy executive about the difference between dry, abstract information and a story that will connect with people at an emotional level and is much more compelling.
Wow. I'm loving this. I really am. But I do have a question. We often ask our guests what their biggest business achievement is. And it's obviously different for everybody. But this was, when you sent through kind of, we ask all our guests, just for those that are watching this, to kind of give us a little hint about some of the things that you've done, the good, the bad, the ugly. And I want to pick up on this one. Talk a little bit more about your biggest business success. And I think this is amazing.
Well, it's difficult to choose from, of course, David, because I have so many wonderful accomplishments. But recently, it was really encouraging to me that the CEO of the world's largest company, Walmart, publicly posted on LinkedIn that my book, Business Storytelling from Hype to Hack, was on his favorites list, one of his top 10 picks of last year, which he's using to help lead this mammoth ship. And I hope that it really does help these 2.2 million employees to communicate better and accomplish their objectives.
That's quite an audience, isn't it? If you've got an audience of over 2 million people waiting for you, it's a bit like Google. The world waits for Google to tell or share their story, and they don't do it very well. So that's decent work, Jyoti, right? If the CEO of Walmart says, this guy knows what he's talking about, I'll use some of his strategies and tools to make my company better. That's the sort of endorsement you'd put on a t-shirt. Brilliant.
Last I checked, we haven't sold 2 million copies of the book yet, so there's still a way to go.
Well,
you're getting there though.
Even if they put them in store, right? They sold them. I don't think, they drive a hard bargain, do Walmart. I don't know if they would give you a lot of profit, but even if they appeared in every store, that would be a decent start for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And so people like you and I aren't even interested necessarily in making a profit off of our books. So I'll give you an example. I was working with one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies year before last, and there was a relatively junior young man who was just entering an intern, and I gave him a copy of my book because he asked for it, and I was happy that he was interested. But a year later, he was no longer an intern, and he was actually in charge of inviting people to come and give talks for a particular department. And of course, who did he invite? Moi. And so that ended up paying for the cost of the book many, many times over. And so I like to think of books and talks and chats like this as seeds. And you never know what sort of opportunities will open up as a result. And so I do like to be generous with my time and expertise in things like books, because it always comes back many-fold.
Yeah, my book's been doing the rounds for a while, and I'm rightly or wrongly attempting to write the follow-up. And I've most definitely given away more than I've sold, that's for sure. Which isn't the problem. It was never the idea, as you say. Never. I'm not J.K. Rowling, right? So I'm never going to sit back and live off the royalties. However, I want to share stuff that I think is pretty cool with other people as far and wide as possible. And certainly when I'm speaking from stage, I want to say, well, you like that? Here's more of that kind of stuff. And you mentioned making a connection, a really important part of storytelling. I guess stories make connections better than, let's say, emails or spreadsheets that we were talking about earlier. Is there a particular part or style of story that really kind of lends itself to, boom, there's a connection?
So what I like to say is that when we have a message to communicate with people, do they know who we are? Think of it like receiving an email. And if you don't know who the sender is of that email, it's probably spam, right? So unless they catch your interest and attention within a couple of seconds, and it's something that you want and a source that you trust, you assume that it's not a trustworthy source. And yet, even in business, experienced people make this mistake all the time. I make this mistake still. I often have a message which I'm so eager to communicate people, and I believe in this message so much that I neglect the very thing that will determine whether people listen and receive this message or not, which is me, the messenger. So I say that before we try and make a message connection, we have to establish a messenger connection. Now, I classify stories, a sort of taxonomy of stories. And one of the story types that I encourage people to think about and collect and prepare is the messenger story or connection story. And what this is, it's a 30-second or a 2-minute anecdote which establishes common ground. There are other stories like, why am I here? So let's say that I'm, in fact, this happened recently. I was talking with a group of people and it emerged that they were teachers. So I could say, oh, that's very interesting, and ask what grade do they teach and that sort of thing. And I quit school when I was 15 to become a novelist. Okay, that's already an interesting connection. But they might then think, okay, this is someone who doesn't believe in education, which is not true because I also teach at top universities now. So what I did instead was I said, you guys are teachers. That's such an interesting challenge because I know how much material you have to try and get through. I remember the first time that I gave a workshop for a school, and I prepared every minute of this workshop, and I ended up only getting through about a quarter of the content. So I really appreciate the challenge you guys have getting through all this material. And bang, there was the connection. They understood that I got them, right? Because I addressed a pain that they have, and I shared an experience about myself having this similar challenge. And before I knew it, I was invited to give another workshop at one of their schools. And you can do this exact same thing in different fields. So it's worth thinking about what experiences do I have, or even do people that I know in my family or people that I've worked with have, that can establish that common ground.
Storytelling is such an important, as we started off beginning the show, such an important factor of engagement. And when you're presenting, speaking from stage, as a pitching to your potential investor or stakeholder or new prospect, hopefully to become a customer, it's really important that we kind of get our message across when we're presenting, when we're speaking. But stories are powerful because we can visualize them, we can see them, we can join in that story. For our listeners, our viewers, what couple of tips would you suggest that they utilize when they're giving their next picks, their next presentation? How can they make it more engaging? How can those stories work? Should they be long stories, short stories? What's the relevance? What are your kind of golden nuggets to take away this morning?
One thing I talk about, and I think this is quite helpful for people in thinking through their presentations, is 2 ways that you can storify a message. One of which is by telling anecdotes. These could be short stories, like I mentioned, 30 seconds to 2 minutes, which is usually the length of time that an executive has or someone in a team meeting to slip in there. Or if it's a short presentation, let's say 5 to 10 minutes, then that's the size of story that you're looking at. However, if you're giving a keynote presentation or a longer talk, half an hour, 1 hour, then people will thank you if you don't just tell 2 or 3 anecdotes. That already does get you a lot of traction. But what you really want to do is go further and tell a performance story, or what you could call a stage story, which is immersive. So you're talking maybe 5 minutes here rather than the 1 to 2 minutes. So the longer the talk is, the more storified your content needs to be in terms of the actual stories that you're telling. But you can also look at story structure. So what are the steps or stages of the content that I want to communicate? And is it the best order? There was a chap called Joseph Campbell who was a sociologist, and he studied people around the world, tribes, the legends of many different people groups, and he found commonalities. People who are into fiction or screenwriting know about the hero's journey. And he observed that there were these common plot points, or there was a similar structure to the way these stories were told. And that's because our brains work in a particular way. So what is the order in which you can put information in a psychologically appealing way? Joseph Campbell had 17, I think, particular steps, which people like George Lucas then used to write Star Wars. That's much too complicated for business. So I've boiled it down to 8 steps in my dominate framework, because all of us want to dominate the information sphere, which are things like desire. What do my audience want to know or want to do? And obstacle, what's preventing them from having success? And only then do we introduce ourselves as the mentor, M, and that's the way we should be seeing ourselves. So some of what we should be doing is putting ourselves in the right shoes, casting ourselves in the right role of the story in a presentation, and thinking that our story is not here. I'm not telling this story to make myself look good, talking about my accomplishments and so on, but how can I couch what I want to say or want to teach in such a way that the audience is the hero and I want to help them succeed? And I have many different tips practically that people can use, such as having a hook at the start to get people interested. Why should they hang around? Change is something people often neglect, and then their stories can sort of ramble because they're going on. You don't see where are they going. So plan out your story in terms of the plot points, see what you can scratch out. And this brings us to the idea of an accordion. So an accordion, when someone's playing it, it can be tighter and smaller, and that's your 1 or 2 minute version, or your elevator pitch maybe, but you still want to make sure you've got that change in the story. And then you can open up that accordion and you can tell the 5 minute version if the setting is right and you have that sort of time.
I like that. I like that accordion approach to that flexibility. I've only got a short form gap for a story, or actually something a bit more immersive, a longer form, which it reminds me of a question I should have asked right at the beginning. So we have a new member of the team starting. She's, let's say she's dominant on Twitter, for example. And I'm not massively au fait on Twitter, so I'm not sure if it's a space for good storytelling. But there must be loads of members of the audience wondering, how do I tell good stories on social media, where realistically my limitation is it's short form, really short form, probably less than anecdote short form. Does it lend itself for storytelling?
Well, there are a lot of people who do tell stories in short form, and I must confess that is not an art that I have mastered, or to be frank, even I'm that interested in pursuing at the moment. After all, I do write 600-700 page fantasy novels, and I'm trying to get shorter. That was one challenge for business storytelling from hype to hack. I started off by writing 500 pages, then I distilled it down to about 100 pages. So I'm not a social media expert, but what I can say, and what I have advised some of my clients, teams implement, is that you start off by having things like a controlling idea, which is a concept from screenplay writing. It's a way of framing things. So whenever we have a message, we want to think about what a bad word is spin that you want to put on it, or how you want to frame it. What is the context? I always say context before content. So what I advise people to do is to build their long-term story structure. So you can use something like the Dominate framework, which I mentioned earlier, and then you'll have a lot of different sound bites that you can use. And you can make sure that you run through that order or highlight one of those steps in a tweet. So that's, or whatever platform that you want to use. So that's one way that you can be telling something of a consecutive story over days or weeks. What you really want to make sure is that you're aligned with your overall story strategy. Now, to use the example of Twitter, I don't even know what the right term is, but I know that people can post multiple tweets, and then you get people scrolling, and sometimes you could have quite a long thread. I think that's what it's called. And I've seen some of those work very nicely. The interesting thing about things like Twitter is that you have to, it's sort of like those old serializations that people like Dickens would do. And it's quite an art form, because you have to get people to keep reading from tweet to tweet to tweet. And I know on Instagram, there are all sorts of dirty little tricks that people use to boost engagement, such as purposefully including a spelling mistake and things like that, so that people will comment and say, oh, by the way, you have a mistake there. I don't advise those sorts of tactics. But like I said, it's not my area of expertise. I tend to work with leadership teams on the level of strategy.
You probably saw at the beginning of the show, we loaded up ChatGPT and we got it to write a story about Nick and I, and it done an amazing job. And I'm going to pop that into the chat channels for everyone to have a look at and give their opinion and feedback. But I thought while we were just listening to you talking about Nick's question, can you tell a story in 280 characters, which is what Twitter currently utilizes. So I thought, let me have a look at ChatGPT. Now, here we go. Another quick live demo. So let's bring it up on the screen, Nick. Here it is. I've already loaded the question in ready here. So I've put, write me a story about a business show starring David Bell and Nick Luby from Chatbox Productions and special guest Jyoti Guptara in 280 characters for Twitter. Okay, here we go. Let's see what it does. This could go totally wrong. David Bell and Nick Luby host Business Buzz. Okay, well, that's pretty good on Chatbox Prod. Special guest Jyoti Guptara shares his insight on global marketing trends. Well, not quite, but not far off. Dynamic duo. Jyoti drive discussions on innovation, disruption, and growth strategies for companies. Tune in for a jam-packed episode, and then it hashtags it as well. Not bad, not bad. And then if I was to take a long version story of that, which I asked it originally to do, I'll let this run in the background. But now it's going to write us a story about the three of us. I mean, the tool is amazing. Do you think, the question really coming from back onto this, do you think this has a future? Do you think, I know maybe not today, I appreciate it's still early terms, but do you think this could replace authors and writers? Do you think it will have the same storytelling abilities? Or do you think this is just a phase that we're going through?
I think it's Pandora's box, David. There's no going back. AI is here to stay, unless, of course, energy challenges and things like that lead to a completely different future, which we never know. I think this changes our role in the value chain. But it's not just authors, it's IT professionals, because AI is programming. So it's everybody, really. It's even middle managers, it's all sorts of jobs. So it's a challenge for all of us to think, how can we do what AI can't do? And this is something I've been saying for years, and it's a nice little sound bite, right? So in an era of automation, we'll have to do what robots can't do, right? And 800 million jobs are under threat and so on, McKinsey study. And I've been saying that for a couple of years, but I feel like now is the time when people actually are feeling the sense of urgency enough to start asking these fundamental questions, such as, what is a human being, right? And this brings us back to the author's job, because what we're supposed to try and do is help communicate the human experience in fiction, or even in business, if people have the sorts of roles that you and I do. So this is actually potentially, if we play it right, an advantage for people like us, because there's plenty of work for everyone in this field, I believe. Certainly, if the interactions with large corporations that I've worked with or observed are anything to go by, people need a lot of help in education, in academia, in business, when it comes to communicating human to human, of course, often with stories. So I'm not nervous, I'm not scared, and I don't think other people should be, but I do think we should be talking a lot more about these foundational questions, such as what is a human being and what direction do we want society to go in, so we can start putting those sorts of regulations and civil society bodies and things like that in place.
That sounds good to me. Human to human. Well, you know me, I'm a human-centric communication guy. So yeah, it's music to my ears. I'm fascinated to see how AI affects the creative world, and then what us humans. I'm referring to us humans. What we either add to that or what we do differently. Time always against us, Jyoti. I want to ask this question. I know David's will have a final question. Favorite book, fiction and non-fiction. This is the most difficult question that I think I would ever get asked, because there's so many. But a really good one that you think, you know what, if I was on a desert island, I want that in the collection. Ideally, a fiction and non-fiction one. And you could include your own books, but or mine. But you know, it's quite a broad spectrum of books out there. Do you have particular favourites?
Whenever I get taken away by a particular book that I'm reading, when I get immersed in it, then that tends to be my favorite, because it's what you're currently experiencing. I did last year read, or rather listen to, the audiobook of The Far Pavilions, which I absolutely loved. It's about 1,000 pages by MMK. And this is written by a lady. I thought it was a man, but, you know, here's my sexist, biases in play. But she did such a good job of writing about things like honor and warfare and adventures. I just, sort of assumed this was one of those Indian army officers, British colonial officers or something like that. But of course she wasn't. So Kim is a good length to take to a desert island too. That would be my fiction pick. I identify with the main character as well, who is British but thinks he's Indian, and so he has those two cultures that I also have the honor of dealing with in my person. In terms of non-fiction, I had the privilege of working with a philosopher, Vishal Mangalwadi, who wrote a book called This Book Made Your World, and this is about historical narratives and why certain cultures went in certain directions and globalization and modernity started to happen. And it's, I would say it's one of these underrepresented narratives or theories, because he talks all about worldview and how basically the Bible and biblical values, such as being humane to each other, the concept of human dignity and human rights and things like that, really shaped history. And that coming not from one of these, Western churchy type of people, but from an Indian philosopher. So that would be my top non-fiction pick for now.
Brilliant. I've noted them both.
Fantastic. We do come very close to the end of today's show. Two final questions for you. Kicking off with question one. Your top business tip. You're pretty aware, we've spoken about it, that we have an exciting book being compiled at the moment, coming together, where we're getting top business tips from all our guests and beyond. People joining the show, if you're watching this, you can give us your top business tip. You might make it into our top 100 tips to showcase in our first edition. What would be one of your top business tips? And it doesn't have to be around storytelling. It can be anything you want. Something you'd teach your younger self if you go back in time.
I really wish that I had started collecting stories that were useful to tell and organizing them in categories. So this would be my tip, because this is what I help clients with as well. Whether you're an individual or for your whole department or organization, start a story collection. Some people call it a story bank, because it appreciates in value the longer that you have it, the more stories you start entering into whatever that note-keeping software is, like Google Keep or Evernote or a Notepad. it becomes more and more valuable. So start thinking of the types of people that you need to persuade to do certain things, classify your stories, and then every time you're reading a nonfiction book or listening to a podcast or the Business Breakfast chat show, then you or I told an interesting story, and our audience should be writing these down and classifying them so that they're immediately actionable and start making a difference.
Brilliant. I will send you across the ChatGPT story. You can pop that into your story bank. You never know. It could be an interesting conversational point in the future. And then finally, for those that want to find out more about what you do, how you can help them, how can people get in touch?
Storyworlds.inc. That's written together. That's one of my websites for my fiction work at the moment. A few months ago, I just published this co-authored book, Fortune's Favor. So that sort of work is found on storyworlds.inc. That's like the pen ink with a K. And my main website for my business work is my surname. That's Guptara.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter and Insta, either with, basically just by looking for my name, because I'm the only person on earth called Jyoti Guptara. So that makes it easier for you.
Uniqueness. We love someone that's unique. We all are unique, but you're ultra unique because you're the only person with that name in the world. Makes it easy to Google or ChatGPT you or Bing you and find you. It's been wonderful having you on the show here this morning. So much covered this morning. Lots of great conversations. Of course, look up the book as well. If you're interested in finding out about business storytelling, you can find the book on Amazon and other bookshops, obviously, probably in Walmart. If you're in the US, you can go and find this in the Walmart store on the shelves. Highly recommended by the CEO of Walmart as well. Jyoti, it's been great having you here this morning. Thank you so much. Have yourself a great day, and we'll check in and catch up with you soon.
Thanks so much for having me. All the best, Nick.
Thanks, Jyoti. Take care.
Yes.
Thank you. Fantastic.
Brilliant.
What a guest. What top tips coming out there, left, right, and centre.
Brilliant. Makes my effort at writing pale into insignificance, mate. You know, I love it. I absolutely love books. I love a physical book. I love to read. I love to smell a book. I love to, the feel of a book. And like Jyoti, I love to immerse myself. I know I've found a really good book when I'm stealing time to open the book. I've got 5 minutes, I've got 10 minutes. I'll just have a quick look, and then I'm stealing time away from other tasks to lose myself in that book. Inspirational stuff, and everyone should try and adopt more of that storytelling technique. Certainly at work, make work a lot more enjoyable and connected if we told more stories.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, there we go. Another Business Breakfast Show done and completed. Another great guest joining us in the studio. And we're back next week with another great guest. We've had to get the timing just right, but next week we have John Brandler, and we're going to be talking about AI art. John Brandler comes from Brandler Galleries. For those that have seen him on the show before, he finds lots of these Banksy pictures, buys them, takes them, and then exhibits them and gives them to local councils and authorities and towns, cities to showcase so people can enjoy that art. And he's here next week with a question around, can AI art be as good as human art? That'll be an interesting show, Nick. I wonder what we're going to get from that.
Well, I think between now and then, mate, set yourself a challenge, get yourself on ChatGPT, or whichever AI does the art, and ask it to do something, maybe show related, in the style of Banksy, and we'll see if Mr. Brandler can tell the difference. He'll laugh at it, no doubt. But I wonder what AI could create in the style of Banksy that is, let's say, doesn't appear on a wall that needs to be removed by mechanical diggers. Try it out, mate. You've got the tech. Let's see.
We'll see what we can come up with. Until then, I've got a week to prepare for next week's show. So we're back here next Thursday morning, 8:00, as mentioned, with our special guest, John Brandler. Till then, it's bye-bye from me.
And cheerio from me.